Today's hero? Nah, just a corporate employee who plays for his green and gold. Real hero? Yep, a patriot who protects our red, white, and blue. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This week, just like last week, Memorial Day weekend, we kind of focused on players who died in action. I'd like to focus this week on players who were at D-Day. Now, there weren't many. Many of them were minor league players. Some, particularly one, probably the most famous catcher of all time in baseball history. We'll get into him a little bit later. But these particular players who were stars on the baseball diamond were also stars on the battlefield and paid the ultimate price, many of them sacrificing their lives on the beaches of Normandy as the Allied push came to France in 1944 on June the 6th. And this would be the real turning point in World War II. And I'd like to highlight some of the players, both Canadian and American, because I did a previous podcast and I found an interesting player from Canada who also served in the Canadian Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force, was taken actually as a prisoner of war by the Nazis, and then would not just return to baseball, but play a number of years on the major league level with the Philadelphia Athletics. And I'm talking about a fellow by the name of Phil Mart. But I'll get back to him because I'd like to focus right now on the Americans who are also there. And of course, the one player that everyone knows was at D-Day, serving in the United States Navy, was Yogi Berra. And I was just saying earlier, it is amazing how there's such a confluence of history, historical events, all on Yogi Berra. It just seems like the 20th century. You cannot talk about the 20th century without mentioning the great Yankee catcher, three-time MVP, winningest baseball player of all time in terms of World Series and pennants, Hall of Famer, arguably the greatest catcher of all time. I know, being a Johnny Bench fan, they'll probably get an argument there, but you cannot argue with the fact that the man has numerous championship rings, not just as a player, but as a coach and as a manager, winning 2 pennants with the Mets and the Yankees, never winning the World Series, but of course winning pennants. Just a phenomenal career for Yogi. I'd like to take some time and I'll do him towards the end. I'd like to mention a number of players that I found and who sacrificed. Joe Pinder, killed in action on at Normandy on D-Day. Elmer Wright, I do believe we mentioned him last week. Here's a nice picture that they kind of put together. I couldn't obviously find any baseball type cards for Joe Pinder, but he apparently potentially had a major league career and unfortunately sacrificed his life for us. I'm going to tell you this. Here's some stuff as I go back and forth between D-Day and the players. I didn't know this, and I've got this from history.com. 7 interesting things, surprising facts about D-Day. Now, I know my history buffs, my World War II aficionados, they know this going in and out. It's almost like, did you know Willie Mays wore number 24 for the Giants and the Mets? That kind of trivia, that kind of insight. But really just engaging once again with World War II and really focusing on that lately for me. I'm doing so much investigating on World War II, and each day you're just finding new nuggets of information. But the first one that the history.com website had was Eisenhower threatened to quit just months before D-Day. Now, these are just the headlines, and I'll just read. Just a few months before the D-Day invasion, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower and English Prime Minister Winston Churchill were at odds over a controversial plan. Eisenhower wanted to divert Allied strategic bombers that had been hammering German industry plants to instead begin bombing on critical French infrastructure. For Eisenhower, the switch in bombing seemed like a no-brainer, but others, including Churchill and Arthur Bomber Harris, head of the Royal Air Force, didn't see it that way. Harris saw the plan as a waste of resources. Churchill was concerned about collateral damage to France, an important ally. Facing this opposition, Eisenhower threatened to step down from his position. Thank God he didn't, because under his leadership, the Allies were able to invade. It was successful, although, from what I've read, the objective was not particularly met. There was a number of snafus and problems with the invasion. But as you think about it, 10,000 men sacrificed, casualties. I think I mentioned that 2,200 Americans. And that I'm just giving as an estimate because as I was investigating this, historians are still not really sure how many Americans were actually lost on D-Day. There seems to be a bit of a controversy. Unfortunately, the numbers might be higher of Americans lost on D-Day. Right now, though, the number, I'm just going to give the closest or round it off, 2,200 Americans. Over 7,000, I believe, were hurt or wounded, casualties. Basically 10,000 Americans sacrificed on that day. I was looking at the Canadians, and their sacrifice was over 1,000 casualties and 359 Canadians killed in action on the beaches of Normandy that day for D-Day. Another guy I wanted to highlight never made it to the major leagues. His name, he was from Rhode Island, Lou Alberigo, private first class. Look how handsome he looks in that uniform. I'll tell you, American uniforms, I talked on previous episodes about baseball uniforms and how I love the Cardinal uniform. And, of course, the Yankee is seen as the be-all and end-all uniform. United States military really puts to shame all other uniforms of all other nations. They just look so elite in our uniforms. Personally, I love the old 7th Cavalry uniforms the best. You know, the Custer uniforms, the old Fort Apache, the old John Wayne movies and stuff. I love those uniforms, probably the best. But these stand alone, and they keep improving. Unfortunately, Alberigo, and I actually stopped this tape and redid this because I was going to have Private Ryan music in the background. Then I thought, we might have a problem with copyright. But Lou Alberigo was actually shot just like the movie commences, with the landing party, the bullets and the barrage of mortar fire, machine gun fire on the boats that were carrying the soldiers. And apparently Alberigo never even made it out of the boat as he was shot in the head and sacrificed for America in the landing craft, just like the movie so brilliantly shows in the landing as Saving Private Ryan begins. But Alberigo sacrificed his life. I believe he was 17 or 18. Another player. He didn't make the majors, but his name was Leon Day, a pitcher. And the reason I bring him up, he was at Normandy, and he did serve. Thank God he wasn't killed. In fact, he served nobly. I think he might have been a medic. And he served at Normandy on Omaha Beach and all the rest of it. But he could have been, I was looking at his minor league stats. He played for Newark, and I believe it was the Newark Bears. They might have been either a Yankee or a Giant affiliation, and he had been playing with them since the age of 17. And then he was drafted into the Army, and he served 1944, 45, and then comes back at 46. He was 26 years old. He actually started in the Negro Leagues with Baltimore at the age of 17 in 1934, and then bounces around, goes to Brooklyn, Newark, Homestead, and then winds up in the Canada, AAA and the independent leagues with Winnipeg, Toronto, and Edmonton. Oh, he had one stop with Scranton. But anyway, the majority of his career, age 20 until he was drafted, was with Newark. And it seemed like, and of course, the numbers are the best stats that they had at the time. But he did in 1942 as a pitcher go 6-3 in the minor leagues. So this is a guy who probably had some potential, at least to come up and maybe, as everyone used to say, get a cup of coffee in the major leagues. But World War II interceded, and he was at Normandy 1944, 1945, comes back. Unfortunately, he's 29 years old. And in his last year with Newark, goes 9-2. But baseball still hadn't broken the color line. And to be fair, I don't think anyone was really going to take a chance on a 29-year-old pitcher. There was reason and strategy behind taking and picking Jackie Robinson, a guy coming into his prime, a guy with a college degree, a guy who had been on the platform, a man who had been on the platform. I apologize for using the word guy there, but a man who had been on the platform of just a national stage, being a college athlete, 4-star athlete at UCLA, and a man with personality, conviction, and charisma, Jackie Robinson, to break the color line. Leon Day, though, served nobly in World War II, and then put together a 19-15 minor league career, and then in the Negro Leagues was 38-16. So this guy definitely had potential. Definitely had potential. What hurt him, as I said, 29 years old, then kind of steps away from the game. I forgot to tell you this. 1950, he comes back, so he probably left. Probably had to surrender his dream of maybe playing in the major leagues, but probably has a change of heart, winds up in Canada, and at the age of 33 goes 4-2 with Winnipeg in the independent league. And as I said, it's too bad that either he was a little bit younger or maybe didn't quit on his dream. And who knows, he could have been another Satchel Paige coming up and helping a team in a pennant. But that was Leon Day. All right. There is a player, probably there were a number of Canadians, but I want to focus on 5 Canadians who did see time, I believe, at D-Day. At least that's how I preface it when I put it in. But I'm going to give you the names. A couple of them you might be familiar with, but I will tell you this. Sherry Robertson. And these are all players who played in the major leagues in the 1940s. And then I do believe saw action. Jeff Heath, who played for Cleveland. I'll just give you a picture of him as well. This is Jeff Heath. Actually, Jeff Heath is an interesting guy because he has a great season in the 40s and, in fact, finished very high. I think he finished in the top 10, maybe even the top 5 in the MVP. And, of course, this fella that everybody, old Yankee fans should know, is George Selkirk, who played for the 40s and 50s Yankees. And, of course, this is a picture of Selkirk and Mickey Mantle. When Mantle was in Kansas City in the minor league level, probably Selkirk, I'm just going to hypothesize, maybe he's recovering from an injury. Maybe he's a coach on the team. I'm not really sure. But obviously, you can see that at the very least, he was probably giving some mentoring to Mickey Mantle, giving him some advice that he can take with him to the major leagues. Jeff Heath, George Selkirk. They were Canadians in the 40s, played ball, did see some service in the Canadian Army or the Canadian Air Force. And that brings me to this man. His name is Phil Mart. I don't know why I'm having so many problems today pronouncing names. March Children. But this guy is an interesting, probably outside of Burra, one of the more interesting veterans of World War II, who, obviously played in the major leagues. And this is what happened. I was doing a little biographical sketch. Again, I put in some keywords and found a wonderful website, and it's Canada Hall of Fame baseball .com website. I think that's what it was. And they had an article on Mart Children and his success, not only on the ball field, but his courageous efforts on the battlefield. Here's his deal, though. He is discovered working in the mines of Creighton back in the early days, 1937, 1936. Anyway, he is signed to a minor league deal, and he goes to Toronto, and he signs with an independent league, the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he has some success there in Philadelphia. Connie Mack. And say what you want about Connie Mack. He was, of course, the owner, general manager, and manager of the Philadelphia A's. One thing, it's amazing how history repeats itself, because Mack, like Finley, you could actually argue new talent, could spot talent. And as I said in a past Park Ridge sports history, Charlie Finley was the one who really put together those swinging A's teams of the early 70s with Jackson and Monday and Bando, Vida Blue, Catfish Hunter, etc. Anyway, Connie Mack discovers him. They sign him to a contract. And in his debut season, well, I shouldn't say that. In his first full season with Philadelphia, he actually went 0-2 in 1940 at the age of 26. Here's another guy, late stages. Anybody who follows baseball analytics or the metrics will tell you that Bill James had done the research and basically made a discovery that age 27 seems to be the best year in a baseball player's career, that they seem to have everything comes together that year. And then after age 27, according to James, players are on, let's say, the downhill. Now, that's not perfect. It's not written in stone, but he did the investigating. It seems that age 27 seems to be the apex of many players' careers. Be that it is may. 1940, Phil gets his first shot in the major leagues, goes 0-2 with the A's in 1940. But in 1941, it looks like the A's had enough confidence, saw enough in him, that they actually gave him 30 starts, actually 27 starts. And he actually completed 14 of them and wins 10 games. He actually goes 10-15 with a 3.57 ERA. Now, you might say that's mediocre, but here's the deal. He won almost 17% of the A's wins that year, as the A's were 64-90 and finished a woeful 8th place in the American League. In fact, let me just tell you how many games they finished behind the New York Yankees. They finished 37 games behind the New York Yankees. So to have 10 wins on a team that had 64, it's not too bad. And he actually did a very good job on the team, going 10-15 and 3.57 ERA. The following year, 1942, though, get this. He really turns in a great year at the age of 28. All right, 28. So there it is. Age 27, he's 10-15. For this guy, yes, you could say, well, he just disproves James's theory. But don't forget, this is only his it's going to be his second full year in the major leagues. He goes 17-14 for the A's that year. And I even broke down some of the teams that he beat. In fact, he defeats Washington, Boston, Detroit 3 times. Actually, he beat Detroit 4 times that year. All right. In addition, he beat the White Sox twice. He does beat the Yankees after dropping 2 tough games to them, but he lost to Hall of Famers Red Ruffing and Lefty Gomez. Interesting thing about him in this season, he actually records, he loses to Hal Newhouser, and anybody who knows Newhouser in 1944 and 1945, he's the MVP of the American League for the Detroit Tigers as a pitcher. He defeats a guy by the name of Masterson for the Washington Senators on 5/10/41, and he spun 6.1 innings and only allowed 2 earned runs. His ERA at that time was 3.77. So you can see that it is coming down. He's becoming a better pitcher. Make a long story short about this season. He won 17 games for a team that won 55 all year. Almost a third of the games were won by Mart children. Not only that, but he finished 9th in the MVP. 9th in the MVP for a team that finished in 8th place. And I'm going to tell you some of the guys who were in front of him. A fellow by the name of Stan Spence. Well, actually, Lou Boudreau would finish behind him. Of course, he's a Hall of Famer, manager known for the William Shift and all the rest of it. Led the Indians to the 48 championship, still their last World Series. In fact, they beat the Red Sox in a playoff series that year. Lou Boudreau was 10th. Then it was Mart Children, who finished 9th. He actually had a 2.6 WAR. I really don't know. I have to be honest with you. WAR, of course, is basically it's a new stat, last 10, 15 years, maybe even 20. Don't know how sometimes, and I've argued this before, how a guy seems to have a really good season and yet has a very low WAR, and another guy who seems to have the same kind of numbers with the same type of team in the same context has, a much improved or a higher by far WAR. Well, that year, pitching for a last place team, Mart Children had a 2.6 WAR. And I actually think, I know the numbers are concrete. There's no real subtlety to it. I would love to see how sometimes they get the numbers. But he's 17-14, has a 4.2 ERA, and pitched 244 innings. Now, I'll give you, maybe the high ERA hurts him. But again, he's playing for a lousy team, and he's playing in a hitter's ballpark. Connie Mack was a bandbox. Anyway, Stan Spence finishes ahead of him for the Washington Senators. Joe Dimaggio, and he'll come back into play. I'm going to tell you about him a little bit later on when the Yankees finally do get beat by Mart Children later in that same year. Interesting little thing. Tex Hudson, who was with the Boston Red Sox that year, goes 22-6. Tiny Bonham, 21-5. He's number 5. Vern Stevens, St. Louis Browns. He is 21-5 with the New York Yankees. Vern Stevens, number 4. Of course, Stevens would help lead the Browns to their first and only pennant and World Series appearance in 1944, and then goes to the Red Sox and has an unbelievable season. He drove in 159 runs one year with the Red Sox. Just a monster year. And kind of a weird player in this respect, and we've talked about him. Still to this day, can't imagine why he's not really in the Hall of Fame when he had about 4 or 5 unbelievable seasons, and he did play with a lousy franchise in the St. Louis Browns. Anyway, Johnny Pesky, number 3. The winner of the MVP, 1941, was Joe Gordon, who I believe was an infielder, second baseman rather, finished with a 7.7 WAR. And this is where you wonder if WAR were around today, where these players would finish. Ted Williams was actually finished second with a 10.5. He had the highest WAR of any of the MVP players, probably had the highest in the league. He bashed the ball 36, 137, had 145 walks, which was basically double, almost double what Joe Gordon had in walks, and hit 356, and he had a 499 on-base percentage. Now, look, Gordon had a great season. The Yankees won the pennant. They win the World Series. I get all that. But Williams, almost really 30% higher in the WAR, and played 3 more games, scored 141 runs. Gordon only had 88. He finished the second. But I'm just telling you, there's 3 in the top 10 Hall of Fame players there, a number of others, very good players. And you have Fillmore Chilton finishing 9th with a crummy team. Pretty impressive. And that's why I'm saying, maybe Lady Chance, Lady Opportunity, maybe if this guy's playing for a Detroit or a Boston, maybe he makes a difference, and all of a sudden the Yankee dynasty isn't so great in the 40s. Anyway, he goes off to war, and this is why I'm going back and forth. And before I go off to war, here's another super fact. Hitler thought he was ready, but Nazi defenses were focused in the wrong place. Now, I had heard and read that before, but just to give you interest, Hitler, Mr. Ego himself, Mr. Psychopath, as early as 1942, Hitler knew that a large-scale Allied invasion of France could turn the tide of war in Europe, which kind of goes back to my theory that the Allies, or baseball, purposely not play those two that Monday and Tuesday in first week in May and in June. Did they purposely not arrange that because they were anticipating the Allied invasion on those 2 weeks? Remember, you're dealing with tide forces and all the rest of it. But Hitler knew that there was going to be a large-scale Allied invasion of France and that it could turn the tide. The problem with Hitler is that he never listened to his generals. He was the be-all and all, end-all. The master Führer, the Führer of the master race. And he decided that, I'll read this, but thanks in large part to brilliant Allied deception campaign and Hitler's fanatical grip on Nazi military decisions, all decisions basically made by him, the D-Day invasion of June the 6th became precisely the turning point that the Germans most feared. In 1942, Germany began construction of the Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile network of bunkers, pillboxes, mines, and landing obstacles, which is brilliantly portrayed in Saving Private Ryan again, up and down the French coastline. But they ran out of resources, manpower, and money to install a continuous line of defense. So instead, they focused on the established ports. But the Allies didn't invade ports. The top candidate for the Allied invasion was believed to be the French port of Calais, where the Germans installed 3 massive gun batteries. Meanwhile, the rest of the French coastline, including the northern beaches of Normandy, were less fiercely defended. Thank heavens. What's more, if Hitler had listened to Field Marshal Rommel, matters might have been worse for the Allies landing at Normandy. Interesting little take on D-Day, courtesy of History.com. Now, why is this important? Mart Chilton is drafted into the Canadian Royal Air Force, and he's actually a tail gunner. And they fly 25 European missions. Unfortunately, I believe the 26th mission was the one in which the flight is hit and it goes down. And unfortunately, 6 Canadian soldiers, his crew members, his crewmates, his teammates in the air, lost their lives in the plane crash. Mart Chilton survives. But this is where his story becomes unbelievable. He would make an interesting movie. And he is actually captured by the Nazis and is imprisoned in it as a POW for 9 months. Here's what's even more incredible about this guy's baseball. career. It really is. And yes, he finished 68 and 75, and his ERA is, a 3.87. I get all that. But just imagine this. You've just served, you've just done battle. The enemy has now captured you, and now you're a POW. Baseball is the last thing you're thinking about at that point. And not only that, but physically and probably, I will tell you this, and I've said this to my students in the past. I think I love athletes so much, or sports so much, because athletes definitely have a mental drive that's so different from the average person. And I think great soldiers are like that as well. Nothing seems to faze an athlete when mistake is on the field or when they're in the slump. I'm not saying that all athletes don't, let's say, occasionally, lose their self-confidence. But great athletes, even athletes at this professional level, they're separate from amateurs in their take on things. I really believe that they just have a special, something inside them that really, really makes them survive and makes them stronger and makes them succeed, whereas other people might have given up. And this applies to the Canadian pitcher, Phil March to Children. And that is this. He becomes a POW and actually lost a third of his body weight. And according to baseball, he was 170 pounds. Baseball Reference has him as 5'10", 170. So not a big monster athlete, not like 6'3", 6'4", 240. He was just a regular-sized human being at that time, 5'10", 170, and he lost a third of his body weight, almost 60 pounds. So he comes back from the war, 110 pounds. Yes, he survives a POW camp, but now he's back after the war. He's 110 pounds. And he comes back and pitches one game. He loses his only decision in 1945. Probably what Philadelphia did, brought him back from the war and said, hey, suit up, you can pitch. And I think it was probably a great move. Of course, I don't have any inside on this, but if you're the Philadelphia A's, this guy comes back. He's done service for the Canadian and for the Allies. Hey, give him a shot, bring him right back in, put him in where he can feel comfortable and get him ready for next season. Well, he pitched 3 games, 2 he started. He did lose a game, but then he comes back in 1946. And I just want to tell you this. Prior to coming back, apparently he does suffer that the war does change him. The post-traumatic syndrome that affects many of our veterans. And apparently family and friends noticed there was a huge change in him. I mean, who wouldn't have change after being a POW, losing a third of your weight, etc.? But the mindset of the athlete, here it is again. 1946. Although he leads the league in losses with 16, he's 13-16 with a 3.49 ERA on a Philadelphia A's team, ready, that won 49 games. So he basically wins over 25% of the Athletics wins that year. Of course, they finish in last place, and he goes 13-16, really has an unbelievable ERA. Now, I didn't break down this season as I did the 17-win season, but the A's finished in 8th place. Yes, they were 49-105. They were even, here's how bad they were. They finished 17 games behind the St. Louis Browns, who were 66-88. And of course, the Browns would never return to their 44 form of winning the pennant. But they finished 8th that year in 1946. Yeah, 1946, they finish 13-6. He finishes 13-16. The team finishes dead last, 17 games behind the St. Louis Browns. But his best season He goes 19-9 at the age of 33 in 1947. And ready for, and by the way, he's 13-16 for that team in dead last. He finished 22nd in the MVP run. 22nd. And of course, 1946, you have Ted Williams leading the Red Sox to the first and only pennant in Williams' career. And of course, they lose to the St. Louis Cardinals. In 1947, he puts it all together at the age of 33. Has a 3.22 ERA and wins 19 games and helps the A's improve from a 49-win team to a 78-76 team that finished fifth. And basically, he wins again 25% of the team's victories. Pretty impressive. What's even more impressive is that he finishes ninth in the MVP that year. And some of his wins, well, I will tell you this. Just getting back, he finally beats, I think I mentioned this, he finished in the MVP, he finishes ninth again. Not bad for a guy under 500 for his career. Who's first in the voting? That year it's Joe DiMaggio. Who's second? Ted Williams. Who's third? Lou Boudreau. Who's fourth? A very good pitcher, Joe Page, 14-8, 2.45, 2.48 ERA. It would be interesting. He goes 19-9. The guys who finished in front of him, Bob Feller, Hall of Famer. I believe George Kell might be a Hall of Famer. I got to look that up real quick. Lou Boudreau, Hall of Famer. Ted Williams, Hall of Famer. Yeah, George Kell, Hall of Famer. 5 of the guys who finished ahead of him were Hall of Famers. And really, the 2 pitchers that finished ahead of him, you could really argue that he should have been the Cy Young. I mean, the argument could be made that Bob Feller, 20-11, 2.68, if they had the Cy Young then. And then Phil was 19-9 with a 3.22 ERA. He had 276 innings pitched. Feller was 299. Feller was playing for a better team, obviously, because the next year, the Indians win the pennant. And maybe he gets slighted. And maybe if we have a 19-9 season today with a last place club like that, or a team that does improve, they move up to 5th in the order, this guy might have gotten votes for a Cy Young. Anyway, kind of his career bottoms out after that. He only wins 9 more games in his career, loses his last 27 decisions. He goes 9-18, has 1 more appearance with the Red Sox in 1950. And he goes 0-3 with the Philadelphia A's. And the interesting thing about that is with the A's, he kind of starts and then they basically never take him off the bench. I don't know whether he was demoted and then brought up. I was doing the research kind of fast on that. But he finishes his career 68-75, 3.93 ERA. Now, he did lead the league in walks twice and in wild pitches twice. But I will tell you this. For those 3 years, where he goes 17-14, 13-16, and 19-9, not too bad. Not too bad. You can win with players like that. You know, he's not the ace of your staff, but he definitely is a guy who you are going to win with if you had better parts around him. So that is Phil Mart Children, the Canadian pitcher who performed so brilliantly, not just in the major leagues, but in Normandy and in World War II in France. And of course, I saved the best for last, I guess. We're talking about this. Of course, Yogi Berra. I had to get a picture of Yogi when he was with the Mets. And I do, all you Yankee fans, I do have him in the late 60s with the Yankees. There he is in his Yankee pinstripes, the beautiful NY lettering up there, unique to the Yankees and to all of baseball. But there he is in his one season as a Met player with the New York Mets. I think he had about 30 at-bats before hanging it up, had a few hits for the Mets. We talked about that before. The reason I bring up Berra is this in the last couple of moments. Yes, we can talk about his unbelievable career. He was 3-time MVP, as I've stated before. Not only did he win as a player, all-time winningest World Series rings as a player, but he also guided two teams to pennants, the 64 Yankees and, of course, the 73 Mets. That in itself, and both teams went to Game 7s against definitely, well, I don't know about the 64 Yankees, but I will tell you this. The Cardinals were the team of the 60s there in the National League with the Dodgers because they would win. That would be their first World Series win, 64. Then they would go on and win pennants in 67 and 68. And then, of course, so they were really on the rise. The Yankees, this would be their last pennant for a long time. So they were the aging wonders. Basically, Berra does a nice job with that 64 team. And he does an incredible job with the 73 Mets. They came within one win of defeating the Oakland A's, who win 3 straight, not pennants, but World Series. Yogi Berra was there at Normandy. And maybe him being there was a good sign that the Allies were going to win, because Yogi has the winner's mentality. And anybody who knows Yogi, has been around Yogi, knows that winning just emanates from him. This has been Will O'Toole for a D-Day special show on Park Ridge Sports History. Thank you for joining.